Hi, my name is Twyla Singh. I am a health inspector with the Hennepin County Environmental Health Department, and this is a short presentation on the requirements for food licensing in Hennepin County. So we call this type of license an itinerant license, and these are for short-term events. So anytime that food is being served to the public within our county, a license is required, and we are going to go through the process of how to obtain one of those licenses and the requirements for that. So we have two different types of licensing available in Hennepin County. We have low licenses and regular licenses. And these licenses can be found on our website, which is here in front of you. The application is downloadable, and you can send it in to us. We'll go over how to do that in a little bit. And the low license covers foods that are specifically on the list in front of you. So if the food that you want to serve to the public is not on this list, it does not qualify for a low license. So that would include prepackaged ice cream, beer cans that you do not open, shaved ice, snow cones, those kind of things. If you want to do something more complicated than that, such as grilling burgers, hot dogs, pulled pork sandwiches, those type of licenses, those type of foods require high risk licenses or regular licenses from us. So remember, there's two different types of licenses. There's the low license and the regular license. The low license, which are the food items on the list in front of you, are $26. And the regular licenses, which are everything that is not on this list, are $52 currently. All right, so in Hennepin County, we offer two different types of licenses: low licenses and regular licenses. If you are looking at what type of license that you need, look at our low license first. So on our low license covers over everything in this list in front of you. So if the item that you want to sell to the public is on this list, then you qualify for a low license. And as of spring 2018, the fee for that license is $26. If you want to sell food to the public which is not on this list, including things such as burgers, brats, pulled pork sandwiches, you would need a regular license. As of spring of 2018, that license is currently $52. In Hennepin County, we recognize licenses from the Minnesota Department of Agriculture, from the Minnesota Department of Health, and we also recognize cottage food licenses. So catering licenses, which you can obtain as a business in Hennepin County or as a state, then are not sufficient enough to sell food to the public outside of the business operation. Meaning that if you are a licensed business in Hennepin County, you need to obtain an additional short-term license in order to sell off-site. So if you want to take your ice cream cart to a park and sell, then you need to obtain a regular or a low license from us. In Hennepin County, we do not recognize city and state liquor licenses, so those are not sufficient for food operations. And again, you would need to obtain a short-term license from us in order to serve food to the public. Licenses from other cities in the county are also not recognized, meaning that if you have a license to serve within the city of Minneapolis, you need to obtain an additional Hennepin County license to serve outside that jurisdiction. On the map on the right, you can see the cities that are in blue are covered under the Hennepin County jurisdiction. Cities in white have their own health departments, and therefore they have their own licensing options. So if you have a license for the city of Plymouth, you would still need to obtain an additional license through Hennepin County to serve food to the public in Plymouth or outside of that. There are certain exemptions to whom needs to be licensed, and that includes fraternal organizations and churches. So if the public is being served on church properties, we do not require a food license, and we also do not require schools, fraternal organizations, or patriotic organizations or sportsman events. And those exemptions are listed on our webpage as well, because it is kind of confusing. So if you have questions, definitely reach out to us or look it up online before you go any further with the approval process. In order to get approved for a low or regular food license, you need to submit your application to the Environmental Health Office. As I said before, you can either submit that to us via fax, email, or in person, and there you can pay in cash, check, or credit card. However, please do not send your credit card information via email or fax. It is not secure. So what will happen is you will submit your application to us without that, and then we will call you on the phone to get that information from you, or you can call us to give us that information as well. It's more secure than sending it over email. What happens then after you submitted your application is that a health inspector will call the designated person in charge of the event on the phone, and we will discuss any of the requirements and the setup and the timing and where the food items are going to be bought from and stored, and then we will either approve it or we won't approve it. Once it's been approved, changes after that approval have to be reapproved. So you need to get all of this done 10 calendar days before an event. Otherwise, we have to charge a $30 late fee. This is not flexible, and we do not allow for schedule changes after it has been approved, unless you want to resubmit and repay. So your license, which is pictured on the right, will be mailed to you via snail mail, and that license needs to be posted at the event. It needs to be the original license. It cannot be a copy. No photocopies are allowed. In an emergency or a very short timeline turnaround, so say you submit your application to serve the public 2 days prior to your event, and you've paid your $30 late fee, we will email you a PDF copy of that license. Like I said, that is only in last-minute situations. We do not like to do that, and we avoid it. And the person who is in charge of the event needs to be designated on that application and will be in charge of posting that license. These licenses are non-transferable, and they are specific to one date and one location. On the right, there is a self-inspection checklist for short-term events. This comes with your license application and must be filled out prior to your event. The health inspector who shows up at your event will be asking for this checklist and asking you to go over it with them. So the checklist needs to be, again, completed by the person in charge. It helps people prepare for the event so that if there's something that was forgotten before serving the public, you have a chance to fix it. And it's more of a guidelines than a fact sheet type of thing. So it's a final safety check, and you can begin operating at your event prior to the health inspector showing up if this has been completed. So just don't be surprised when the health inspector shows up and says, "Hey, can I please see your self-inspection checklist?" Because they will be asking for it. Additionally, with that self-inspection checklist comes a guidelines page, and that guidelines page has ideas for you about what you need to set up and how you can safely set up a hand sink, or if you have a rented one, what do you need to be doing with it. It talks about if you need to be washing your dishes or not. And if you have questions about that, please let your inspector know on the phone when they call you. So now we're going to go over some of the requirements for food stands for the short-term events. One of the number one things that we are looking at when we do our inspections, and the number one way that you can keep the public safe, is to practice proper personal hygiene. And in terms of short-term events, that means washing your hands frequently and correctly. So hand washing equipment has to be conveniently located. And you have to have soap and a nail brush and warm running water, paper towels, and a catch bucket for each hand sink setup. The reason why it has to be warm running water is because if the water is cold, nobody's going to wash their hands. And it needs to be done for a full 20 seconds. So you can sing yourself an ABC song or your happy birthday song to yourself twice. That any way to get 20 seconds of full scrubbing is the way to wash your hands. Hand sanitizer is not an approved substitute for hand washing. So what that means is that you can use hand sanitizer all you want, but you have to still wash your hands before using it. So hand sanitizer does not substitute for hand washing. Additionally, gloves are not a replacement for hand washing. So gloves provide a barrier for germs, but you still have to wash your hands prior to putting on your gloves and after you take off your gloves. You also need to provide a lined waste receptacle for all of your garbage which you might produce at one of these events, and also for your paper towels for hand washing. Okay, so events that are greater than 10 days per year require one of these pressurized hand washing sinks. They're mechanical, you can rent them, some people own them, and otherwise, if your event is less than 10 days a year, you can create your own gravity hand washing sink, pictured there on the right. The important thing to know about the gravity hand washing sink, or any type of hand washing setup you want to use, is that you have the listed items that we talked about in the previous slide, and that you have a hands-free spigot, meaning that you can turn the water on and not use one hand to hold it open, so that you can wash both hands at the same time and then turn the water off. Inspectors, when they come to view your hand sink, they will be looking for evidence of hand washing, which means that they will be looking for paper towels used, water in the catch bucket, things like that. Take a look at the picture that you see in front of you. There's a couple things wrong with this. One of them is that you don't see any easy access to the hand sink setup. So if it's underneath the table, it's not conveniently located, especially for somebody who's really tall. Additionally, you'll notice that the spigot on the water container is not hands-free. There's a button that you have to push down. That means you can't wash both hands at the same time. So this type of spigot and hand washing setup would not be approved and would need to be rectified on site if it were found during an event. This is a fairly typical setup that we see at events in Hennepin County, especially during the summertime. Can you see the hand sink at this setup? If you can, you have magical eyes, because I can't see it. One of the first things that inspectors will be looking at in these tents is your hand sink. They'll want to know where the food workers or the food servers have washed their hands prior to touching the food before it is served to the public. So again, hand sinks need to be conveniently located, easily accessible, and fully stocked. Floors, walls, and ceilings. Your floors need to be some type of cleanable surface so that if a spill or an accident occurs, it can be easily cleaned up and operations can assume. So this means that if you're located in dirt or gravel or grass, that you need to put something down on top of it as an alternative to stepping on, so that you're not trekking in things from outside into your tented kitchen. You need to have some type of overhead covering for your food operation. This can be a tent, it can be a physical structure, an awning, and it needs to be protecting the food from things that fly overhead, like birds. We do require some type of wall, especially in adverse weather, so that you don't have rain sleeting in from the side contaminating your food. And you need to have proper lighting, meaning that you can see what's going on in the tent underneath the counters at all times, even during the night. And you need to, as we discussed before, provide a lined garbage container in your booth so that you can easily take the garbage in and out of your area of operation. And that you can close it and contain it, and that way pests aren't attracted to your event while you're there. Storage and transportation of food is something we get a lot of questions on. So transporting your food from wherever you've purchased it to your location, there's a couple of things you need to keep in mind. One of them, you cannot store your food overnight in your house. It needs to be stored in a commercially licensed kitchen if that is the case, and it needs to be stored safely. Safe food storage includes storing all of your food, your utensils, your equipment off the ground, 6 inches off the ground specifically or more. Food needs to be covered and insulated during transport if it is to be kept cold or warm. And food stored in coolers, so cold foods, need to have blue ice packs. They cannot be sitting in loose ice. A loose ice melts and contaminates your food. And if beverages are being stored on ice during your event, the ice needs to be draining so that it doesn't sit in a bath of water. Vehicles that you use to transport your food in need to be free of pets and toxic chemicals, so no gasoline cans and Fido in the truck with you while you're moving the food from one location to the other. Ice, it is important to remember, is considered a food. So if you're going to be using ice in your food service operation to be served to the public to eat or drink, it needs to be stored 6 inches off the ground and treated exactly like you would the food as we discussed in the previous slide. Ice is not to be handled with bare hands. So just as you would not assemble a sandwich with bare hands, you cannot use your hands to grab ice and put it into a cup. And any water that you use during your events needs to be from an approved drinking source and labeled potable. Dry ice or pack ice can be used for events that are 4 hours or less. Mechanical refrigeration is required if your event is longer. So I'm going to repeat that because it's important. If your event is an all-day event, you need to have a mechanical refrigeration unit for your foods that need to be kept cold. So your deli meats, your milk, anything that you need to be keeping them in a fridge. So if your event is only 2 hours or 4 hours, then you can use the dry ice packs or the blue ice packs for those events only. Prepare and serve all of your foods for your event out of the reach of customers. We do not allow self-service unless proper utensils are provided and there's a shield or a cover over the food. The reason we don't allow this is we don't want items to be contaminated as people serve themselves. So if you have a tray of muffins, they need to have some type of lid or cover over them so that hair and people who sneeze on them don't contaminate the muffins. Self-service items need to be in squeeze bottles, packets, containers with lids, or under a food shield. All open food must be protected from customer contamination, and also, as we discussed earlier, birds or flies or anything that comes from overhead. Items that you can use to increase the safety of self-service items can also include souffle cups, toothpicks, tongs, and paper plates. When you're storing your food, you need to separate the raw animal foods from each other and also the raw foods from the ready-to-eat foods. So ready-to-eat foods are foods that are cooked already, do not need to be cooked anymore, and are ready to be given to the customer. Raw foods are foods that need to be cooked prior to service. These need to be kept away from each other during storage, preparation, holding, and display so that they do not contaminate one another. You, as the food worker, should use tongs, gloves, and wash your hands frequently in order to avoid contamination when working from raw foods to ready-to-eat foods. Also, anyone on your team and who will be serving food needs to be wearing clean clothing and have some type of hair restraint on and be practicing good personal hygiene. So the person in charge is in charge of making sure that their team members are following these guidelines. Wearing clean clothing is important because if someone has a dog or a cat and they come to work in your food operation, they could contaminate the food with that dog or cat hair, which might be on their clothing. Additionally, anyone in your area of operation cannot be eating or drinking from open containers or smoking within the food stand. In terms of hair restraints, we do allow hats, visors, tie-dyed headbands. All of those type of things are okay as long as they prevent hair from falling into the food. Some events require that you wear, wash, and sanitize your dishes and utensils during service. This is common if your events last more than 4 hours. You can set up a 3-bucket system. However, warewashing, remember, is a 4-step system, process system. And you have to wash your dishes, rinse them, sanitize them, and air dry them. So we're going to start over on this one. Sorry, can I use your pencil again? No, it's not. Is this yours? Oh, okay, sorry. Okay. What do I want to say about soapy warm water? Clean water, power hydration. Okay, we are restarting this slide at 29:30. Warewashing requires 4 steps. You can have a 3-bucket system set up, and your 4-step system is to wash your dishes in warm, soapy water, to rinse them in clean water, to sanitize in the next bucket with a proper concentration, and to let the dish air dry. Storing all of your utensils in a protected place and sanitizing every 4 hours is required. So every utensil or plate which has been in use for more than 4 hours needs to be washed, rinsed, and sanitized and air dried if you are planning to continue to use them. Not all events require warewashing due to their length or location, and it is always a great idea to have extra utensils available in case they become contaminated or you drop them on the floor. So sanitizing in that proper concentration is important. If you use too high of a concentration of sanitizer, you're actually doing quite a bit of harm because you need to have a food safe level of sanitizing in that 3rd bucket that you've set up. So you can use unscented bleach or quaternary ammonia, also commonly called quat, Unscented bleach is important because you don't want to have perfumes or dyes in your sanitizer. You must have and use your test strips with that sanitizer, and the health inspector, when they show up, will ask you for your test strips and they will test your concentration of sanitizer. If you are using the unscented bleach, it must be between 50 to 200 parts per million. If you are using quat, it must be between 200 and 400 parts per million. The test strips you can get at wherever you buy your food from. If you are unsure about the bottle of sanitizer that you're using, read the label. It must state in the label how to sanitize food contact surfaces in order to be an approved type of sanitizing solution. The label in this case is the law and must be followed. Wet wiping cloths that you use to wash the dishes or to use as sanitizing surfaces must be stored in a sanitizing solution and not sitting out wet on your counters. We recommend that you sanitize all of your surfaces frequently and at a minimum every 4 hours. Most sanitizer wipes that you see at the store are not approved for food contact surfaces, but check the label because some of them are. So remember, check the label, read the label is the law. We're going to now discuss some very basic food safety 101 that needs to be addressed at these short-term food events. Food employees must report symptoms of illness to their managers. Team members that have vomiting or diarrhea must be excluded from working with food. Employees may not return to work for at least 24 hours after their symptoms have gone away. If they have been diagnosed with norovirus, the exemption period is 72 hours. This is the most important way that a food employee can protect the public, aside from washing their hands very frequently. Studies have shown that almost 70% of foodborne illness outbreaks are due to things like norovirus. If there are questions or concerns about this, please contact one of us. We will be delighted to discuss it with you. There are 5 illnesses which, if one of your food employees gets diagnosed with, they need to report to the manager that they have been diagnosed with it. That includes E. coli, Salmonella, Shigella, hepatitis A, and norovirus. Customer illnesses also need to be reported, even if it's just one complaint, meaning that if a customer comes up to you and as a food worker complains that they got sick because they ate your food, you are required to report that to the health department. The number is on the screen there. I'm not missing anything here, Hannah. I think I am. Let me know. Okay. We are restarting the slide now. Remember to wash your hands more than you think you need to, and to ensure that your team members are doing the same. Particularly, hand washing needs to be done before touching any food or eating, after using the bathroom, after handling animals, so if you're at a petting zoo, this happens a lot, and anytime somebody has coughed or sneezed or handled soiled equipment, taken out the garbage, gone to smoke a cigarette, or switching between the raw and the ready-to-eat foods that we talked about earlier. Those are the times when the health inspector will be trying to observe people washing their hands, and as a manager, you need to be making sure that your team members are doing the same. Remember that gloves are not a substitute for hand washing, but they should be worn if you are going to be handling food, because we do not allow bare hand contact with food in Hennepin County. Instead, you can use gloves, tongs, or tissue papers. No hand washing with your gloves on. Remember, take your gloves off prior to hand washing and then put on a fresh new pair of gloves before handling food. There are certain parameters that food needs to be cooked to depending on what kind of food it is. And in front of you is a basic overview of what would be needed. One of the important things to do if you're going to be cooking meat is to bring a thermometer with you so that you know how to check the internal temperature of your food that you're going to be cooking. We know that you know how to barbecue, but we also, as health inspectors, will be checking the temperature of the food that you're serving at your event. So there is a basic guideline that you can use for your team. We require that hot foods be hot and cold foods be cold. But what does that mean for you as the food manager? It means that you need to maintain your hot foods for longer, that are held for longer than 4 hours at 140 degrees or above. So that means that you can cook your steaks to 165 degrees and hold them at 140 degrees for longer than 4 hours if needed. Hopefully your steaks don't last that long. And your cold foods need to be below 41 degrees. So if you are keeping your cold foods inside of a cooler with those blue ice packs, then they need to be measuring at 41 degrees Fahrenheit or lower. Foods that are made in commercial kitchens and reheated for hot holding need to reach an internal temperature of at least 165 degrees Fahrenheit for 15 seconds. Pre-cooked foods, such as hot dogs or sloppy Joe mixes, need to reach an internal temperature of 140 degrees upon reheating. Reheat your foods rapidly within 2 hours. The temperature danger zone is between 140 degrees Fahrenheit and 41 degrees Fahrenheit. It's called the danger zone because that's where bacteria like to grow, is in between those temperatures. Ideal conditions for bacteria to grow in are at room temperature. That's why we say you should keep your hot food hot and your cold food cold to prohibit bacterial growth. Always keep your thermometer handy to check your food temperatures. And potentially hazardous foods must pass through this temperature danger zone as quickly as possible, meaning, like we discussed before, reheating your foods as fast as possible. Now this is important. If you're going to use time as your control instead of temperature, you need to have an approval from Hennepin County to do so. So that means when the health inspector calls you on your application, you will need to state that you will be using time to control for bacterial growth. So if your cold foods are not going to be held at 41 degrees or lower, and if your hot foods are not going to be held at 140 degrees or higher, then you have 4 hours to use those foods and then throw them away. They cannot be reheated and they must be discarded. If you have questions about the food licensing process, please call us. We will be happy to talk to you about them. Remember that hand washing and illness reporting are very important. All of the application materials are online on our website. And we are available Monday through Friday to talk to you in person at our Hopkins office in downtown. Thank you very much.